When most of us see a honeybee, we think of one of two things, right? Honey, or getting stung. But behind every single one of those bees, there's a beekeeper fighting this constant, really complex battle just to keep them alive. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain and see what that fight actually looks like, from deep inside the hive to the massive global threats they're up against.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the basics, how you keep a colony strong in the first place. Then we'll pinpoint their number one enemy. After that, we'll get into the battle plan for fighting that tiny terror. Then things get a little weird with the mystery of vanishing bees, and we'll wrap it all up by looking at the perfect storm of stress that's hitting bees today.
Okay, so first things first. Before you can even think about fighting off diseases or pests, you have to make sure the colony itself is strong. It's got to be healthy, it's got to be robust. And that all starts with their diet.
This is probably the number one question beekeepers get asked, and the answer is absolutely yes. See, when nature isn't providing what the bees need, beekeepers have to step in. It's not just a nice thing to do, it's crucial for preventing starvation and building up the colony's strength for all the challenges ahead.
A hive's diet is actually pretty simple when you break it down. It's a two-part system. For energy, to fly around and do all their work, they need carbs. They get that from nectar, which they turn into honey. If there's no nectar, beekeepers give them sugar syrup. But for growth, for raising new bees, they need protein. And the only place they can get that is from pollen. So to help them out, beekeepers will give them these things called protein patties. It's that simple. Carbs for energy, protein for growth.
But feeding isn't just about dumping food into the hive whenever. Oh no, it's all about timing. It's super strategic. You feed in the early spring to kind of kickstart the queen into laying more eggs. You feed during a dearth. That's a period with lots of rain or a drought when flowers just aren't blooming. And most importantly, you feed in the fall to make sure they have enough food packed away to survive the long winter. And with protein, you have to be thinking way ahead. You got to feed it at least 6 weeks before you need that big population boom.
All right, so the colony is strong, it's well fed, but that just makes it a bigger, juicier target for anything that wants to invade. And while bees have a lot of pests, there is one, and pretty much all researchers agree on this, one that is by far the most destructive threat they face anywhere in the world.
And that's not an exaggeration. I mean, when scientists and beekeepers talk about what's killing colonies year after year, one pest stands head and shoulders above everything else. It is the primary driver of colony deaths.
And here it is, meet Varroa destructor. I mean, come on, even its scientific name sounds like a movie villain, and honestly, it's earned it. This thing is a tiny parasitic mite. Think of it like a tick for bees. It latches onto them, feeds on them, and it has become a global nightmare for beekeepers.
So here's the really crucial part. These mites are a 1-2 punch of awfulness. First, they feed on the bee's fat bodies, which is a super important organ, kind of like our liver. This just straight up weakens the bee and makes it live a shorter life. But what's even worse is that as they feed, they act like tiny, dirty hypodermic needles, injecting a whole cocktail of deadly viruses right into the bee's body. The most infamous of these is called deformed wing virus, which does exactly what it sounds like. It leaves bees with crippled wings, totally unable to fly.
So, you've got this microscopic enemy. It's reproducing inside your hive and it's spreading all these horrible diseases. How in the world do you fight something like that without accidentally killing your bees in the process? Well, it turns out the answer is a really smart, multi-layered scientific approach.
Beekeepers rely on this strategy called integrated pest management, or IPM. This is not about just carpet bombing the hive with chemicals. It's a much smarter 3-step dance. First, you monitor. You have to know your enemy, so you're constantly checking how many mites are in the hive. Second, you only treat when you absolutely have to. When the mite numbers cross a certain line, say 3 mites for every 100 bees. And third, and this is so important, you rotate your treatments. You use different methods so the mites can't get used to one and develop resistance. It's all about precision, not just brute force.
Now, when it's time to treat, there are a few different tools in the toolbox. You've got what are called soft chemicals. These are things like organic acids, formic acid, oxalic acid. They work well and they don't leave a lot of nasty stuff behind in the hive. Then you have the hard chemicals, which are synthetic miticides, like one called Apivar. Beekeepers have to be really careful with these, because if you overuse them, the mites will evolve resistance and boom, they stop working. But this is where it gets really cool. The fight isn't just about chemicals. Beekeepers use some seriously clever, non-chemical tricks. For some reason, varroa mites love to reproduce on the male bees, the drones. So beekeepers can put a special frame in the hive, trick the mites into laying all their eggs there, and then just pull the whole frame out.
taking a huge chunk of the mite population with it. They can also buy queens that are genetically bred to be better at fighting off mites themselves. It's this amazing blend of smart management and science.
So you'd think, okay, if a beekeeper can keep their bees fed and get the varroa mites under control, they're in the clear, right? Well, starting around 2006, something really strange and deeply worrying started happening. Beekeepers began reporting a problem where the enemy wasn't a mite you could see. In fact, there was no enemy to see at all.
It got a name that perfectly captured the feeling of it all: colony collapse disorder, or CCD. And this wasn't just a regular hive dying out over the winter. No, this was something totally different, and it was defined by a very specific, very spooky set of symptoms.
And this is what was so eerie. The hives weren't full of dead bees, they were just empty. The adult worker bees had simply vanished. They left the queen behind, they left the baby bees behind, and they left tons of food. It was like the crew of a ship just disappearing, leaving the ship perfectly intact. Even weirder, other insects and pests that would normally raid a dead hive were really slow to go into these. It was a genuine mystery.
Well, the panic over CCD kicked off this massive wave of research. And while we see fewer cases of that classic spooky CCD today, beekeepers are still losing a huge number of colonies every year. So the scientific community has kind of shifted its focus. They've moved away from looking for one single culprit and toward a much more complicated and, frankly, a much more worrying explanation.
This quote right here, this is it. This is the modern understanding of the problem. There's no single silver bullet, no one bad guy to point a finger at. Instead, what we're seeing is that honeybees are getting hit from all sides by a whole combination of different factors that together are creating a perfect storm of stress.
And here are the big ones. You've got the pests and pathogens, like the varroa mites we just talked about. Then you add pesticide exposure, especially from a type called neonicotinoids that can mess with a bee's brain. On top of that, you have poor nutrition because we've replaced diverse meadows with huge fields of a single crop. And then, layered over everything, are the bigger pressures of climate change and even just stressful beekeeping practices, like trucking hives across the country for pollination. But the real takeaway here is that these problems don't happen in a vacuum. Each one weakens the colony, which makes it even more vulnerable to all the others. It's a truly vicious cycle.
And that leaves us right here, with the beekeeper's ultimate challenge today. It's not just about fighting one tiny terror anymore. It's about trying to care for an animal that is under siege from every possible direction. The fight for honeybee survival isn't about finding one simple solution anymore. It's about finding dozens of ways, big and small, to relieve the pressure from this perfect storm.